Welcome back for this part 3, wrapping up on business development for firms. Let's get back to it. Randall, we know that firms are different. We've worked with so many, no two are the same. And this points to the fact that they are being managed differently, and that the values and priorities of leadership are different. Given this diversity of style, do you have any recommendations for what KPIs should be constant? Like what should be constant in terms of measuring to get the most successfully run your firm?
Oh my. I think the answer to that question is very different depending on the firm, right? I think every firm is different. I don't think there's a way to reasonably answer the question. I will say though that you know, there's some issues that do have to be addressed. The traditional way of thinking that somebody who grew up in the 1950s is different than somebody who grew up in the 80s. And that's different than people who grew up in the 2000s and the 2020s, 2025s, whatever the year is. And so we have to realize that generationally, there's different kind of priorities that sometimes people have, right? A perfect example is the issues of and the opportunity, frankly, of having female senior partners. It's very, very challenging, very, very challenging when women also want to deal with the family. By the way, there's a lot of younger people who are saying, I want paternity leave, men I'm talking about. This isn't something 20 years ago that we really spend as much time thinking about, but it's really important if you want the absolute best. Why wouldn't you find mechanisms to make sure that they can thrive? So I think some of the generational stuff is still working its way through. And I don't have I can't say, this firm versus that firm, that firm. I think it's a moving target based on kind of the culture. But I think it's something that most firms are figuring out is pretty important. And the reason why isn't just in terms of retaining the absolute best or recruiting the absolute best, but it's also the fact that the clients have different attitudes as well. A 65-year-old CEO is going to be very different than a founder of some startup who's, say, 30, right? They've got different sort of mindsets and values. And to be able to say, okay, how do we deal with these different types of clients? You have to realize that you have to have different kind of people working in your firm with different types of attitudes and different types of metrics with respect to success if you want to deal outside. A deadline does not go away depending on who is in the firm and who the clients are. The deadline's a deadline. Securities laws or corporate law does not change. Okay. Generally accepted accounting principles do not change. Okay. Those things don't change. The need for CPD, technical CPD doesn't change, but how we actually connect with the market does, right? And we just need to make sure. So you mentioned earlier, diversity, equity, inclusion, right? For all the different communities that are out there on every single dimension. This is something that's important for a lot of people, and it's important for the market, right? ESG, is becoming much more important for a lot of different people. So what does that mean, right, in terms of the firm and how we look at it? Now, these are a little bit off the topic of pure business development, but they're also framing and they're underlying a lot of the things that impact the firm culture and firm behaviors, and we can't forget them. There's a whole bunch of other things too, but I would say that some firms are super, but they've got a blind spot here. Other firms are super, but they got a blind spot here. And it's because the managing partners, it's because the partnership as a whole, it may be the partnership agreement, it may be the history, it may be what their strategy is, right? It may be the kinds of people they recruit, their structure, their technology. Oh my God, all this stuff means that in the view of their partnership group, we've got a strategic advantage because of all that. And this group, we've got a strategic advantage because of all the stuff that we've done. But life isn't static, right? If you just sort of rest on your laurels, you start to degrade a little bit. The thought leadership becomes stale. The trusted advisor relationships become a little less trusting, right? And that strategic differentiation becomes a little less, a little less different, let's just say. right? On the other hand, if you lean into some of the things that you're doing really do well, and you address some of the challenges, and the things holding you back, then it's full steam ahead. But the old, one and done kind of approach to biz dev, you know, I'll just give you another example. We're not experts in the healthcare field. We're not we're not experts in there. We've had some clients, but not experts. you know, Medical training is very interesting. It's also like this mentor-mentee kind of thing. When a doctor goes into residence, and why do they call it residence? It's because practically they're living at the hospital, and very often they've got these 36-hour stints where they've got to sort of cover, and they've got to be available, and they're working. So let me ask you, if you ended up in the hospital, would you rather be treated by a doctor who's at hour number 35 of 36, or would you rather be treated by a doctor who's had a good sleep? And the answer is, well, probably the doctor who's got a good sleep. And so why hasn't that changed dramatically? It's changed a little bit, but why hasn't that changed dramatically? The answer is because the absolute best doctors, medical practitioners out there said, that is the system that produced me, and I'm at the top of my field. And they are at the top of their field. But that doesn't mean that there isn't better or different ways of actually achieving that same goal. So especially for the most successful firms, it's not a question of saying, we got to get back to the studs here. Okay. And it's not either that how the firm is being managed. Okay. The blind spots, as you said, Rania, are so glaring. Okay. Sometimes they are, but they're usually not. The firm is moving ahead. The firm is successful. But is it a 36-hour day in a certain sense, like the medical professionals, or are there some other ways that we might look at some of these business development processes a little bit differently? And I'll just sort of add one other thing. We've got to get SharePoint. We've got to get CRM. We've got to name the technology. The number of times I've gone into a firm where some vendor has sold some technology. We're gonna do knowledge management because we've got, SharePoint is knowledge management. No, it's not. No, it's not. We're gonna do much better in biz dev. We're putting in CRM, and therefore that'll solve the problem. Yeah, good luck. Yeah, good luck. It's not a particular piece of software that's going to make it happen. It's not a particular training course. It's not a particular coaching. It's not a particular, change in the performance appraisal and goal setting process. There's a lot of things that work together here, and I think that is what needs to happen, not just at the firm level, but at the specific for each professional in the firm, in terms of understanding their role in business development, tooling them up to do it, holding them to accountable, and allowing them the freedom to actually do business development in a way that works best for them in the context of the practice of the firm that they're in. I said in this thought leadership course, there's 53 different ways of doing it. Okay. The same doesn't work for everyone. They don't, right? But still, everyone should have the list and the training in terms of what are those things. Same thing with respect to this building a trusted advisor question. It's the very same thing. There's many different ways of doing it. Everybody is different. Every practice is different. The culture of the firms are different, but the individuals can make some of those choices, so long as we put the choices in front of them, right? And so long as we give them the support to sort of be successful doing it.
We're here in Ontario, so I'll just use this as an example, but I'm sure the issue is more global. I'll mention that the Law Society of Ontario has on their website a section specific to business development for firms. And then more specific, it even goes, there's a section on business development for women in firms. Okay, so this is an issue for women that are dealing with this. So do you have any thoughts on how firms, in terms of how they've been traditionally managed and maybe a more modern style of management, and how women fit into this?
So first of all, as a man, it's very hard to say, this is what women should do or not do. So the way I would say is this: if you want to build a firm that's very, very successful, you need everybody on board, right? And the job of any leader is to get the best out of everyone as an individual, and whether that person's a man or a woman, okay, whether they're part of the LGBTQ or traditional, communities, whether they're BIPOC or part of a faith-based minority, you want to get the best out of each and every single one of them, and perhaps because they're part of a group, there's some things that they might be able to do better, or they may have certain types of restrictions, or their goals might be slightly different. So how do you work with that? Because if you want to get the best, you have to make sure that you're sort of working on each thing, and what might be um, what might work for one group or for one person within one particular group might not work for others. I've met and talked to many women partners, some who are very, very, very career oriented, and that's the number one thing, right? And I've spoken to many who are balanced, and a balance at certain segments of their career is very, very important to them. So generalizing sometimes is also a bit of a trap, but recognizing that you need to make sure that you're hitting. So let's sort of I remember working on a law firm uh, you know, recruiting website years and years and years and years ago. And this is a topic way back when. Okay, so if we want to make sure that the brand of the firm for potential uh, new associates is the best, what are we going to put on this thing? And what messages do we want to put in? And the big question is, how do we make sure that the messages aren't aspirational, but when somebody actually chooses to join the firm, we recruit them and they make the choice. There's a match. They come in. They don't say, "Well, 1 second. This is bait and switch. This is different than what's on that's actually on the website, right?" And so, the HR department owns recruiting, okay, but the marketing department owns the website, and the partners own the firm, right? So it's a question of making sure that everybody's working together so that there is actually something that's actually there.
Randall, any business development strategy takes time to see fruit. We have to play the long game. But how can we measure the success of the business development efforts of any individual contributor and staff member in a firm? And perhaps you can talk on what milestones we can look for or look at, and when would KPIs need to be adjusted?
So I think there's really like if we actually go back to basics, there's effectively two types of marketing. There's inbound marketing where you put yourself out there, you develop this reputation in the marketplace. You're doing, people know who you are. You're living at that intersection of trusted advisor and thought leader, and people find you, right? Um, you know, People find you via Google. You know, I speak at conferences. I don't just advise firms, etc., and on business growth. And so if you go to Google, just as an example, and you type in choosing a business growth speaker, after all the advertisements, usually at the very top is me, right? So this is an example of inbound marketing. People find you somehow, and part of it's through the IP, and part of it is Google, part of it's just your reputation out there, and they find you, right? That's inbound marketing, right? And so the question there is, okay, so you can't just write one white paper or do one speech and then magically it happens. This is the kind of thing that's a slow burn that starts early and it grows and grows and grows, and at a certain point the flywheel is spinning and it just comes in, right? And so that does not happen, thank you very much, just when somebody's admitted into partnership. It has to start earlier. And therefore, what are some of the milestones and what are you measuring? I guess I would say at the very beginning, you're measuring progress. Because once you start down this trusted advisor, thought leadership path as an individual, okay, you're you're moving the flywheel very, very slowly. And as long as you keep on doing those kinds of things, eventually stuff will be coming in. When it's amplified by what's happening by the firm, okay, it happens much, much faster. That's why, larger firms that have got the reputation, the brand, okay, it makes it a lot easier. So that is one thing. Okay. By the time you're a partner, and certainly an experienced partner, okay, that should be happening. And therefore tracking the source of any particular business is actually important, because that way you can get a sense as to where they're coming from and the kinds of results that actually happen. Okay, so that's the inbound marketing. The outbound marketing is you're actually having lunch with somebody, or playing golf with them, or you're taking them to a social event, or you're um, doing this kind of thing where you're talking to them about their business and what's going on, etc. Right? And some of that kind of stuff is really more, the metrics are all about the business that's actually being brought in. The obvious, follow-up is how many billable hours is it generating, and collected, etc. And if the firm does any contingency work, that's also something about how long things take, and what the returns are, and margins, and everything, and financing costs, right? But for some of the more general firms that aren't contingency type firms, that it's just a question of, okay, how much business do you have to bring in? Famously, a senior partner at one particular firm would go around, and when a partner would come in and say, we just signed a $1 million deal, we just signed so and so, but probably will bring in $1 million. Well, this partner, the senior partner, famously would say, okay, wonderful, that takes care of today and tomorrow, but thank you very much, we've got to bring in business for the rest of the year to keep the lights on. What are you doing about that? Right? So there's the question of, well, how much do we need to bring in individually, as well as a practice, as well as a firm, okay, when we're doing any of this outbound marketing? If you're doing, for example, um, there's a concept called conversion. So if you're doing marketing, you're doing an event, you're bringing in a whole bunch of general counsels to do some professional development, alongside some of the lawyers of the firm. Okay, for law firms. Same thing in the accounting world or consulting world. You're bringing a client in for some training, right? Well, guess what? The goal isn't just so that everyone gets training, but the goal is to spark some of these conversations. And at the very end of the training, maybe it's some new regulation, or some new tax saving strategy, or whatever it is. Okay, the person who invited you to that event will have a conversation. What are you doing about this? And a conversation might end up, well, maybe you should help us take a look at it, right? Maybe there's something that needs to be done here, right? And so these are some of the proactive kinds of things. There's another kind of work that also needs to be measured, and that is the question of the effectiveness of the referral network, right? Because where do referrals come from? Can we get more referrals from people like the people that refer us? Are certain referral sources becoming drier? Here's a perfect example. As partners start to, I hate to use the word age out, but age out, and all of the clients that they've built all these relationships for 30 years or so, you still have lots of gas in your tank as a partner in their 60s, for example. But it could be that these referral sources retire, and they're no longer in a position of referring. So what do you do in that particular case? If you still want to do the business, if you still need to do the business in terms of hitting your goals, right? So that's also an interesting sort of angle of it. And your personal flywheel from the referrals is slowing down, and you still have gas in the tank. So that needs to be measured too. And there's an expression, if something's not working, don't keep digging, right? Digging more is not going to get you out of the hole. So the challenge for most people in most firms is, okay, is the digging that I'm doing positioning myself for more inbound leads coming in and more referrals in the future? Or is the digging that I'm doing generating more business right now? Okay, specific work that'll make a difference right now. And sometimes we can fool ourselves and say, well, it's really for the later, but you should frankly be, doing a little bit more outbound business development, as opposed to just doing inbound work. So, for example, partners near the end of their career, sometimes they're used to doing a lot of the work that generates inbound leads. But, now you've got to do more outbound work and be more explicit about it. Same thing with people sort of moving into the partnership. Okay. They're so used to, shaking trees because things have got to drop. Otherwise, they won't be admitted to the partnership. But they also have to be working a little bit on getting the flywheel going so that inbound marketing actually will work. So that's a good question.
Randall, the firms that we've worked with, we've seen some offer lots of professional development to the team. Others offer very little, and you'd be surprised. Sometimes it's the biggest ones that may offer little, and the smallest ones that are really investing. It's all types, right? Do you have any thoughts on the message these choices send to clients and partners? Like, do people really care how much the firm is investing in the professional development of their staff?
If you're successful, it's very easy to say what got us here will get us there to the next level. It's very tempting to say that. And for some firms, it's actually true. And by the way, when we talk about investing in our people, every single firm that I've ever been involved with does an awful lot of continuing professional development, right? Because it might be required from a regulatory perspective, or they want to make sure people remain sharp technically, etc. I think though that the business environment changes, right? And it changes sometimes very, very slowly. And sometimes it's hard to sort of notice that it's changing. And so the idea of actually investing in your people from a business development perspective is something that some firms are just not used to. And for them, maybe they shouldn't do it, right? But what I will say is that there's an impact on retention, right? It means that their non-billable time doing business development is a little bit more effective, or possibly more effective. It becomes a mechanism to develop and deliver an aligned message. Okay, particularly for multi-office firms where everybody's different, where the geography is different, they might not see it. It's helpful when people are doing more work from home in terms of building a bit of a culture. There are some definite benefits beyond just the technical. This is how we could build a firm better, and so on. But it's a challenge. On the other hand, sometimes I can't imagine any professional who will sit down and say, something. I think today, instead of billable work, or instead of pressing the flesh directly with the prospect, or giving a speech, I think a better use of my time is to sit and watch 10 half-hour videos, okay, and in a self-paced training course. Who's got time for that, right? And yeah, nobody does, right? And therefore, if they have to do it, okay, they'll put this thing droning in the background on their screen while they're doing real work. And so some of this stuff, particularly with this kind of pivot to, everything virtually and everything by video and asynchronous learning and everything, some people have felt, and if you're listening to this, maybe you felt this, or your firm's tried it and it sort of, fell flat. I agree. I agree. Yet on the other hand, what is very clear is the idea of a micro learning is really, really good. If you can say, listen, sit and listen for 2 minutes, and you're going to learn something interesting, something that might be practical with a bias to action, it's more likely that you could say, well, for 2 minutes, I can do it, right? Same thing with respect to, listen, I've got what, 8 books? Okay, you want to read my books, read the book. But who's got time to read an entire book? Right. On the other hand, you might have time for a 2-minute micro learning tip sheet, right? You quickly scan it, get the concept, move on, right? Some people like books. That's why I've got books, right? Some people, frankly, don't have time for books. That's why I've got white papers. That's why I've got these 3-5 paragraph tip sheets, right? And they're all practical. Different folks, different strokes for different folks. But most people who've got the pressure of doing billable work on one hand, and then directly doing business development on the other, don't have time for a half hour, 1 hour, 2 hour, you know, non technical training. And so we've got to handle it in a different way. Same thing with respect to coaching. Some firms are very big on using coaches, and they've seen huge results, and other firms have no idea what it's all about. But why would I ever need that? I'm a partner, I'm a senior partner, etc. And let me just sort of unpack that. Sometimes coaches are all about building better accountability and helping you achieve your goals by holding you accountable. And there's some value to that. Most firms, that's what partners are for, to hold you accountable. But coaches can do that too. That's one kind of coaching. Another kind of coaching is call it personality based. We're going to teach you to be more assertive or more empathetic, or fix some so-called flaw in the way you're operating, psychologically, emotionally, etc. And there's a role for that as well. But there's also the idea of business development coaching and helping you grow the firm coaching, which is not, and the other two things. And so if that, for example, is happening, and then certain staff groups or partner groups have got some very specific, say, business development training, and then you've got the same messages at the partner retreat or practice retreat or partners conference, whatever you're doing, and it's all the same messaging, etc. It becomes an awful lot easier to say, okay, this is how we're going to move the firm forward, even though your firm is very different from everyone else's, and the people in your firm are very different than everyone else's. So that's my perspective on that.
Randall, bring us home. You get the final word. What is the perspective shift you invite managing partners of firms to consider when it comes to their business development strategy?
And the reason why you're managing partners, because you got it all figured out. Maybe some of the things and ideas you've heard in this one in our session today resonate with you. My advice is this: you're already spending money on all these different things, but is the juice worth the squeeze? And if some of the concepts that we've been talking about actually make sense, my challenge would be to say, okay, where can you test drive them? How do you test drive them? You're not going to sort of put this entire impact program in all at once, but is there some way to say, okay, let's test drive some of these concepts? And obviously, we'd love to be doing the test driving ourselves on that, etc. But I think it all starts from a conversation. Almost a bit of an ask me anything kind of thing where we might sit down. And I think that's kind of really what the next step would be if some of the things that we talked about today actually resonated.
Thank you, Randall, for the conversation and all the insights. And we thank everyone who joined and listened in today. If any of the issues we talked about resonate with you, if you're considering change and want our perspective, if you're planning a leadership retreat, if you're curious about business growth coaching or want to know how we can help align and upskill your team, do reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation and share resources. If you would like invite to these monthly live events, you can email us at info@randallcraig.com or connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'll talk to you soon.